Hey there, America. Tonight we're diving into a legal quagmire that would make even a lawyer say, this is some bullshit. We're talking about the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a relic from a time when America wore a powdered wig and feared Napoleon more than TikTok. This law gives the president the power to detain and deport non-citizens from enemy nations during wartime. It's been used sparingly throughout history, mostly during World War II. But recently it's found a new purpose, deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members. Now, I know what you're thinking, Venezuela wartime. John, have you been hitting the prop bong again? And the answer is no, at least not today. But the Trump administration, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that Venezuela is hostile enough to warrant dusting off this archaic law. This isn't just some dusty old legal textbook case, folks. This is about real people's lives being upended. It's about the potential abuse of power by a president who treats the Constitution like a restaurant menu he can pick and choose from. And it's about the media, as usual, playing their part in this political theatre. Buckle up, because this one's a doozy. The Alien Enemies Act is one of those laws that seems like it belongs in a history book, not in modern-day America. Yet, here we are, dusting it off and putting it to use in ways that its original authors probably never imagined. The law was part of the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, a series of 4 laws passed by the Federalist-controlled Congress. These laws were designed to strengthen national security, but they also had the effect of suppressing dissent and limiting the rights of immigrants. The Alien Enemies Act specifically allows the president to detain and deport non-citizens who are from a country that is at war with the United States. It was first used during the War of 1812, when the US was at war with Britain. The law was used again during World War I and World War II, when the US was at war with Germany and Japan. In those times, the law made a certain kind of sense. The US was engaged in large-scale wars with powerful nations, and there was a genuine fear of espionage and sabotage. But in the 21st century, the idea of using this law to target individuals from countries like Venezuela seems far-fetched, to say the least. The Trump administration's decision to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members is controversial for several reasons. First, Venezuela is not at war with the United States. While the country is certainly facing political and economic turmoil, it is not an enemy nation in the traditional sense. Second, the use of this law raises serious questions about due process and the rights of non-citizens. During World War II, the Alien Enemies Act was used to justify the internment of Japanese Americans, a dark chapter in American history that is now widely regarded as a grave injustice. The idea of using this same law to target Venezuelan immigrants today is troubling, to say the least. The Trump administration has argued that the law is necessary to protect national security and to crack down on gang violence, but critics say that this is just an excuse to target immigrants and to bypass the normal legal process. They argue that the use of the Alien Enemies Act in this way is an abuse of power and a violation of basic human rights. So, what does this mean for the future? Will we see more uses of this archaic law to target immigrants from other countries? And what does this say about the state of our democracy and the rule of law in America? These are questions that we need to grapple with as a nation. It's easy to dismiss these issues as abstract legal debates, but they have real-world consequences for real people. Immigrant families are being torn apart, and communities are living in fear. This is not just about legal theory, it's about human lives. And the clock is ticking. As we move forward, we need to be vigilant about how our laws are being used and who they are being used against. We need to hold our leaders accountable and ensure that our legal system is fair and just for everyone. The Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act is a stark reminder of the power that the president holds and the potential for that power to be abused. It's a call to action for all of us to pay attention and to speak out against injustice. This isn't just some dusty old legal textbook case, folks. This is about real people's lives being upended. It's about the potential abuse of power by a president who treats the Constitution like a restaurant menu he can pick and choose from. This is about real people's lives being upended. It's about the potential abuse of power by a president who treats the Constitution like a restaurant menu he can pick and choose from. It's about the potential abuse of power by a president who treats the Constitution like a restaurant menu he can pick and choose from. And it's about the media, as usual, playing their part in this political theater. Buckle up, because this one's a doozy. The Trump administration has been laser-focused on immigration since day one, and not in a good way. They've gone after everyone, from families seeking asylum to dreamers who only know America as home. And now they've set their sights on a new target: alleged members of a Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua. Now, nobody's saying these guys are angels. Tren de Aragua is a nasty piece of work, involved in everything from drug trafficking to extortion. But are they a threat to national security? Enough to justify using a law designed for wartime enemies? That's where things get murky. The Trump administration claims that Tren de Aragua has infiltrated the US and poses a serious danger. They argue that using the Alien Enemies Act is necessary to swiftly remove these dangerous criminals. But critics say this is just another example of Trump using fear and xenophobia to push his anti-immigration agenda. They argue that these deportations are being carried out without due process, with little regard for the rights of those being targeted. March 15th, 2025 started like any other day in Washington, D.C. The city was waking up to the usual hustle and bustle, with the sun casting a golden hue over the iconic landmarks. The streets were filled with the early morning rush as people hurried to their destinations, unaware of the significant events that were about to unfold. Politicians were lying, lobbyists were lobbying, and tourists were taking selfies with monuments they couldn't name. It was a typical day in the nation's capital, where the wheels of government turned, often unnoticed by the everyday citizen. The air was thick with the usual political maneuvering and the constant hum of activity that defines Washington, D.C. But behind the scenes, a legal drama was unfolding that would have major implications for immigration law and executive power. In the quiet corners of government offices, lawyers were meticulously preparing their cases, aware that the outcome could set a precedent for years to come. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable. The ACLU had filed a lawsuit challenging the use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport the alleged Venezuelan gang members. This act, which dates back to the early 19th century, was being used in a way that many believed was never intended. The ACLU argued that the law was being stretched beyond its original purpose, and that these deportations were not only unjust but also unconstitutional. They argued that the law was being misapplied and that these deportations were unconstitutional. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans, their voices echoing through the streets. They were there to support the detainees, to stand against what they saw as an abuse of power. On March 15th, a federal judge was holding a hearing on the case. The courtroom was filled with lawyers, journalists, and concerned citizens, all waiting to see how the judge would rule. The judge listened intently to the arguments, aware that his decision could have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, at airports across the country, planes were being prepped for a secret mission. These weren't your typical commercial flights. The atmosphere at the airports was tense, with security heightened and operations shrouded in secrecy. These weren't your typical commercial flights. They were chartered by ICE, loaded with shackled detainees, and guarded by armed agents. The detainees, many of whom had lived in the United States for years, were being sent to a country they barely knew. They were chartered by ICE, loaded with shackled detainees, and guarded by armed agents. The sight was a stark reminder of the harsh realities of immigration enforcement. Families were being torn apart and lives were being upended in the name of national security. Their destination, El Salvador, a country many of these detainees had never even set foot in. The journey was long and uncertain, filled with fear and anxiety. For many, it was a return to a place they had fled from, a place that held memories of violence and hardship. As the court hearing dragged on, the clock was ticking. Every minute that passed brought the planes closer to their destination. The lawyers in the courtroom were acutely aware of the urgency, their faces etched with concern. The Trump administration knew that if the judge ruled against them, their plans to deport these alleged gang members could be grounded indefinitely. The stakes were incredibly high, and the administration was prepared to do whatever it took to see their plans through. So they decided to take a gamble. In a high-stakes move, they pushed forward with the deportations, hoping that the legal proceedings would not catch up with them in time. It was a risky strategy, one that could either solidify their stance on immigration or backfire spectacularly. The tension was mounting, and the outcome was anything but certain. As news of the deportations broke, the media went into overdrive. The airwaves were filled with heated debates, emotional testimonials, and a barrage of opinions from every corner of the political spectrum. It was as if the entire nation had been jolted awake, each side ready to defend its stance with fervor and conviction. And as usual, the coverage reflected the deep partisan divide in this country. On one side, you had the left-leaning media, with their somber tones and urgent calls for compassion. On the other, the right-leaning outlets with their triumphant declarations of a long-overdue crackdown. On the left, outlets like MSNBC and the New York Times painted a picture of a rogue administration defying court orders and trampling on the rights of immigrants. They delved into the legal intricacies, highlighting how the administration's actions were not just morally questionable but also potentially illegal. Experts were brought in to dissect the implications, and the message was clear. This was an overreach of power that needed to be checked. They highlighted the stories of individuals who were being deported without a chance to say goodbye to their families, painting a heart-wrenching picture of the human cost of these policies. These were not just numbers or statistics, these were real people with real lives being upended, some of whom were US citizens. The narrative was one of injustice and heartbreak, a call to action for those who believed in the principles of fairness and due process. Meanwhile, on the right, Fox News and Breitbart were busy praising Trump for finally cracking down on criminal aliens. Their coverage was filled with stories of crime and danger, painting a picture of a nation under siege by lawless elements. The message was one of strength and resolve, a leader taking decisive action to protect his people. They downplayed the legal challenges and accused the ACLU of siding with dangerous gang members over American citizens. The focus was on the perceived threats and the need for a strong response, dismissing any criticism as misguided or even unpatriotic. They argued that the deportations were necessary to keep America safe. The narrative was one of national security, of a government finally taking the steps needed to protect its borders and its people, and that any attempt to stop them was putting the country at risk. The rhetoric was stark and uncompromising, a call to rally behind the administration's efforts. Lost in the partisan shouting match were the human stories at the heart of this issue. The media frenzy often overshadowed the individual experiences, the personal tragedies that were unfolding every day. Stories of families being torn apart, of children left without parents, of lives being disrupted in ways that were often irreversible. These were the stories that rarely made it to the front page, overshadowed by the louder, more sensational headlines. Of individuals being sent to countries they barely knew, places where they had no support system, no family, no friends. The disorientation and fear were palpable, yet these aspects were often glossed over in the broader narrative, and of a legal system struggling to keep up with the whims of a president who seemed determined to rule by decree. The courts were inundated with cases, the judges overwhelmed, and the legal battles seemed never-ending. It was a chaotic and confusing time, with the rule of law hanging in the balance.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.